to see you. Good to see you. What a lovely, lovely day it has been. I mean, for me at least. I don't know. It was kind of a relaxing day. Yesterday was one of those intense days with helicopters flying all around my neighborhood and world events. And world events are still spinning rapidly out of control. But today was, for me at least, much more of a day of rest, a day of calming, a day of thinking about things. So, really glad you're all here tonight. So glad that you're all here. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. And if you want me to speak about a topic, I'm Bill Clinton. If you want me to speak about a topic, gotta send me a super chat. That's how we do things. If you want me to speak about a topic, please send a super chat. I will write them down the way we do the show. If you are new, the way we do the show is that what we do is that I give my opening remarks, which sometimes are an epic speech, and sometimes are me discussing world events and giving my opinion about a few items in the news, and sometimes are me rambling about, the weather or literature or movies, and the opening remarks are all over the place. And they will be tonight. They will be all over the place. It's just, you get different stuff, right? Politics. It always gets back to politics with me, but come at it from different angles. That's the opening remarks. The prepared presentation is the opening remarks. Then from there, I do the roll call, and we find out who is watching. We do a roll call where I call you out as I see you, names and locations, and we find out where the audience is and who they are. And that's always really exciting because we find out how amazing and diverse and how special our audience really is. And then I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the show. That's how we do it. That's how we do it. So you are a big part of what we do here. So be sure to post this on Reddit, on Facebook, on Twitter, on every place that videos or links are posted. The more people here, the more fun our conversation will be. I'm Bill Clinton, and I approved this message. I want you to send super chats to Caleb. I'm just kidding. I don't know why I'm doing that. I guess I started to hear kind of a twang in my voice, so I just started doing that. But anyway, yeah, it's been a relaxing day. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and we will jump right in to my opening remarks. I'll be writing the super chats down with the pen, and then in the second half of the show, I will be answering the super chats, and then we're done, and then we can all get back to work on Monday morning. All right, expound on the reasoning behind the purpose for and the results of the... Goodness. Okay. Okay. Alrighty. All right, wrote that one down. Any other super chats, I'll write them down as they come in. Plenty of unnamed orange beverage. Good stuff. All right. So today, for those of you who may not be aware, which I don't expect you to be aware, but you may have seen it on my Facebook or on my Twitter. I guess my life is not as private as some people's is. Today is my 7th wedding anniversary. I've been married for 7 years now. 7 years it has been since my wife and I tied the knot. And since it was my 7th wedding anniversary, we always like to do something special. So today, my wife, we went and had a nice meal, and then we did something that we have not done. Nope, a lot of people have not done in a long time. We went to the movies. We actually went to the movies. You can do that in New York City now. You can go to the movies. They limited capacity. You have to get your your temperature taken, and there's a lot of movie theaters have closed down. But now you can go to the movies. Everything going on in the world and all the stresses and all the social media hate. Thank you, Longworn. Okay, Teapot Dome scandal. All of everything happening. We just thought might be a good day to go to the movies. So It's weird, movies, I like going to the actual movies. A lot of people say, why in the world would you actually go to the movie? Why do that, right? You can stay home and watch Netflix. I don't really, I get bored. I walk into the other room. The thing about the movies is it holds your attention. Um, um, okay, Libya, terrorists, Evasive, battalion. The thing about the movies is it holds your attention. When you go to the movies, right, you're in that dark room, and the only light is the flickering screen, and it gets you into kind of a more relaxed state of mind. When you're at home, you turn your TV on, and you've got, all of your house and everything else, and it's very hard to just, it has to be a pretty good movie to hold my attention at home. If not, I'm going to get up and do something. I'm a get up and go kind of person. Okay, Lenin. Organize in 2021. All right, and I'm a get up and go kind of person. So going to the movies is a way you can kind of let your mind relax because you're not at home. You're not distracted by all the things that are in your home. You're in this separate place. You're in the movie theater. You put your phone away, right? Okay. Puppets. You're in the movie theater and you can kind of sit there and you're paying attention to the movie. And especially if you do what I like to do is I like to go see bad movies, right? When I go to the movies. I like to go see movies that are bad. I like to go see movies that are pulp, that are not high art. I will go see very good movies, but often I will go see bad movies. And when you're sitting in the movie theater and you're watching a bad movie, you're kind of mildly distracted by the plot, but you can kind of reflect in your mind. Your mind gets into another state. The front of your brain is following the plot, and so it's like the back of your brain can kind of open up, right? And you can begin to explore and go over things in ways that you wouldn't normally do. And it is amazingly relaxing to sit in a movie theater and watch a movie and let your mind kind of wander while you kind of follow the plot. It's a very relaxing thing to do. I've had some of the best ideas that I've had for articles and writing, and I've had some of the best ideas sitting in a movie theater. I've also had some of the best ideas right before I go to sleep, right? There's something about, when you're paying too much attention to the world around you, the creative side of your brain, at least this is how it works for me, the creative side of your brain doesn't really take the front. But if you're laying in bed and you're about to go to sleep and it's dark and you're just kind of, mind's drifting off, suddenly the creative part of your mind can come forward. When you're sitting in the movie theater, right, and there's a pretty silly plot, that you don't really care that much about, flickering on the screen in front of you. You can start to let the more creative part of your mind that processes big concepts, it can start to come alive in the background. Okay, some Margarita. All right, movie, Brazil. All right. And so I'm sitting there in the movie theater. And I thought about this whole experience that I've had with going to the movies and kind of relaxing your brain in the movies. The first time that I ever really did this was when I was in high school. When I was a senior in high school, I had a job. I worked in a bookstore. In my little tiny town in Ohio. There was a bookstore, and this bookstore had absolutely no chance of surviving as a business. It closed down shortly after I left the town and went to college, but it had no chance of surviving as a bookstore because people in my town, bookstores were not the kind of thing that they wanted to do, right? It was, I think half of the books we sold at the time that I worked there were like Bibles that people were giving to people as gifts, and it wasn't, it was an independent bookstore. It wasn't a Barnes and Noble or a Borders. It was an independent bookstore. All right, Western Marx, and goodness gracious, writing them down. All right. So, I worked in a bookstore, and I guess this bookstore that I worked in, it was kind of a funny story, is that this older fellow who was a hippie had been driving through my town. He owned a chain of health food stores. And he'd been driving through the town that I lived in, and he'd seen that the local bookstore was going out of business. He'd stopped to get gas or something like that. Saw that the local bookstore was going out of business, and he believed this was a sign from God or the universe. He was kind of a new age kind of fellow. And so he and his wife, they moved to my little town, and this guy who owned a chain of health food stores, he lived in my town, and for a year or two, he tried to get the local bookstore that was going out of business going, and he bought it, and and it wasn't going to work. It was kind of a failed thing, but he guess it was one of those, the guy was very mystical and into the whole power of intention and all that, and so, saw an ad in the newspaper or whatever, and I ended up getting a job at this bookstore, and so that was, I had a little bit of money. I also was the announcer for the soccer team. I would announce the soccer games. I would read off the names of the players at the beginning and play the national anthem, and then I would announce the score and etc. And so I was getting a little bit of money from announcing the soccer games in my town, and I was also getting money from working at the bookstore, so I had some income. I was a senior in high school. So I would go to the movies on Sunday. Sunday I did not work. There were no soccer games on Sunday. I did not work in the bookstore on Sunday. So Sunday was kind of my day off, and I would go to the movies. And in my little town, they did have a movie theater. And this movie theater, it only had two screens. Um, and it was very cheap. You could go to the movies. You could see a movie for about $3.50. Now, inflation, that was a little bit more, but, this is a while ago, but it wasn't that long ago. How long ago is this? I'm only 33, so this is, at least this is maybe 15 years ago. And so, I would sit in the movie theater and I would see whatever movie was showing. I did not care what it was. I would go and sit in the movie theater and I would watch whatever movie was showing. But while I was sitting there in the movie theater, I would be thinking about politics, I would be thinking about Marxism, I would be thinking about socialism and revolution, and I'd be thinking about all kinds of things. And I would kind of play a game with myself, in that I was kind of analyzing the plots of these movies. And a lot of times these were like kids' movies. A lot of times they were like, cheesy kind of family movies. I think one of the movies I saw was RV, the movie RV with Robin Williams, and I can't remember the other movies. It was just anything that came to this movie theater I would see, right? So I would just sit there in the movie theater and watch whatever was showing and think about politics and, while I was sitting there in the movie theater by myself, right? And it was just kind of this like lonely little activity that I could do that was just kind of a way to pass the time in my little town. And so I realized at that age that sitting in a movie theater and watching a movie that you do not care about can be a great way to, really kind of make your mind think and really start to process deep ideas. And so, it doesn't always work. Sometimes, it just doesn't work. But if you had a lot of time, which I did in high school, nowadays I don't have that much free time. But back when I was in high school, as any high school student in a small town will tell you, I had loads of free time. My senior year, I didn't care. I was bored and whatever. So I would sit in the movie theater and I would just think about politics while I ate popcorn, and that was what I would do. I think I would certainly buy Diet Coke while I was there. So maybe the caffeine from the unnamed diet beverage I was drinking, perhaps that stimulated my creative processes. But there you go. That was something I would do. So, going to the movies, sometimes it's a great way to pass the time. Other times, maybe it's not so productive, but whatever. So today, right, we've had a pandemic. The movie theaters have been closed. My wife and I were celebrating our 7th wedding anniversary. We had a nice dinner. We had some good food, and then we walked a couple blocks over to the movie theater, and we went and we sat in the movie. And we watched the movie Finding You, which I do not recommend. Was not a high-quality film. I think my wife liked it more than I did. It's what they call a chick flick, a rom-com, a romantic comedy. Not exactly my favorite movie. But, it was one of those pulp, romance movies. But what I thought was interesting, I didn't know this, right? I mean, we just picked a random movie to go see. We weren't even really thinking about it with much depth. What I thought was interesting was one of the characters in the film was played by Vanessa Redgrave. To folks, if you've watched this live, I've talked on here more than a few times about Vanessa Redgrave. What do we got here? Arctic and NATO. Arctic, NATO, geopolitics. And, Vanessa Redgrave was, she's very old at this point, but she was a famous actress during the 1970s. 1960s and 1970s, and she was a Trotskyite. She was a Trotskyite communist, and she was pro-Palestinian. She was a member of the Workers' Revolutionary Party. She was a supporter of Muammar Gaddafi. And she spoke out for Palestine at a time that was not something most leftists would touch with a 10-foot pole. And there's a very famous speech she gave at the Oscars in 1978. She won an Oscar, and the Jewish Defense League had threatened to bomb the theater if she won the Oscar. All right, 20% inflation. And they threatened to bomb the Oscar. And so when she got up and she got her Oscar, she got up and she said, I want to thank the Academy for having the bravery to give me this award and not listening to a group of Zionist thugs and hoodlums. Of course, the audience starts booing, and, it was kind of a famous incident. So it was kind of ironic with the situation, going on in Palestine right now. And the fact that we had just randomly picked a movie, that we ended up seeing a movie with Vanessa Redgrave, the, Trotskyite, communist actress in it. So there we go. We're sitting in the movie. It's a movie, and it's Vanessa Redgrave. And so we're sitting there, and it's, it's a B movie. It's just, it's this girl and gets a scholarship and goes to Ireland, and there's a famous, actor who's there, and she falls in love with him. And it's just, it's... it's I don't know, not my cup of tea. It's kind of a romantic comedy fantasy, something like that. But anyhow, I'm sitting there in the movie theater, right? And again, what I'm doing as I'm sitting there is I'm sipping unnamed diet beverage, and I'm thinking about politics and everything that's going on. I'm thinking about politics, and I'm thinking about the movie, and I'm all of this, and immediately some ideas about the movie started coming into my mind. First thing first, I noticed that all the actors in the movie were white. Right? I mean, it does take place in Ireland, which is, largely a country of Europeans. But all the characters in the movie were white. And then I remembered how there was a movie a couple years back about World War One. It was all white, and there was kind of outrage. And I thought, did they do this again? Did they have an all-white cast in this movie? Oh my goodness! I'm sitting there. I'm thinking, there's not a black person, or a Latino person, or a person of Middle Eastern descent, or a person of Southeast Asian descent, or an Asian. It's an all-white movie. I'm sitting there, right? And then at one point, the climax of the film is the girl finds a landmark. And this landmark, it's in Ireland. It's like a grave. It's this landmark she discovers, and it has a big Celtic cross on it. And immediately I thought of, in Ireland, the Celtic cross is just a symbol of Christianity. But in the United States, the Celtic cross, we all know what that is. That's the symbol of the Ku Klux Klan. That's what the Ku Klux Klan, the white supremacist group, had on their robes, is they had that Celtic cross, right? It's a cross, but it has like a circle around the cross, right? It's the Celtic cross, they call it. The climax in this movie with all white people, and the climax is she goes and finds this monument with a Celtic cross on it. And I'm sitting there in the movie, and I'm like, whoa. And then, right, we get to the final scene of the movie, and there finally is a black character in the movie, like for 2 seconds, and there's an Asian woman in the film, and I'm like, oh, okay, so I was wrong about that. And then I thought as I'm watching like the final scene of the movie, and the credits come up, I'm like, oh my God, BreadTube has hacked into my brain. BreadTube has hacked into my brain. How in the world? I'm sitting there watching this movie, this rom-com. Why in the world was I going there? Right? Why in the world did my mind go to, oh my God, all the characters in this film are white. Oh my God, there's a Celtic cross in Ireland. I mean, who could have imagined that thing? Oh my God, is this film a dog whistle? Oh boy, secret fascist. And I'm like, seriously, I realize that, like, I loathe BreadTube. I loathe BreadTube. I loathe Jabba the Vosh and ContraPoints and all of that. I loathe this stuff. But just because I have to research the BreadTube universe, right? Just because I have to research the people that are decoding everything for the secret fascist hand signs and all of this, I'm sitting there in the movie thinking like a BreadTuber. I'm sitting there going, is this movie secretly Nazi propaganda? Right? I was literally sitting there in the movie, right? And it's like, and the girl goes to Ireland, and Ireland is full of these loving people, and of course all of them are white, and I'm thinking, Ireland is taking the place of the white homeland in the white nationalist fantasy. Or it's like telling everyone we need to go to an all-white place to solve all of our problems. Right? There's nothing fascist about this movie. I realize this. But my mind was doing the BreadTube thing. I was doing the ContraPoints BreadTube thing as I'm sitting there and watching this movie. And these people loathe me. I loathe them. But even I start playing these silly games, while I'm sitting there in the movie. And I realized, I thought about this, and I thought, wow, okay. Right? I loathe BreadTube. BreadTube loathes me. Right? I'm 33 years old. I'm, someone who's learned in leftist politics and Marxism and economics and history. But then it occurred to me, like, okay, so imagine that I wasn't, somebody who loathed BreadTube. Imagine that I wasn't learned in Marxism and economics and actual ideology. Imagine how easy it would be for my mind to go that way. Imagine that I was a 14 or 15-year-old who wanted to feel special, right? I could have walked out of that theater and said, wow, I saw this movie, and, there was a Celtic cross in it, and it seemed like all the characters were white. I guess there were some characters at the very end who weren't white, but they were just minor, and Vanessa Redgrave was in it, and everyone knows she's anti-Semitic because she, supported Gaddafi, and I think that Finding You is a crypto-fash movie. I could have done that. I didn't, because that would be bullshit, because it wasn't. But I could have made the case. I was sitting there in the movie thinking like a lawyer, sitting there making the case that this was a crypto-fash movie, that instead of going to Ireland, she's actually going to a white homeland, that there's a Celtic cross that's a good symbol in the movie, Vanessa Redgrave, who supported Gaddafi. Oh my God, can't do that. And I'm sitting there thinking like a BreadTuber while I'm watching this movie, and I realize how toxic this stuff is. You could do this with any movie, folks. You could do this with any movie. Any movie. You could do this with Star Wars, right? You could do this with with Star Trek. You could do this with The Godfather. You could do this with The Sopranos. You could do this, and I just realized it's really. But if I had done that, I imagine, right? If I had done that, if I were a BreadTuber and I wanted to feed into this, let's not talk about capitalism and imperialism. Let's just talk about the secret fascist conspiracy under every rock, and why all dissidents need to be immediately shamed and silenced and canceled in order to protect Joe Biden and his liberal order. If I thought that way, I could have walked out of this movie and I could have maybe gone viral, right? I could have made a video. Oh my God, I saw this movie, and it would have all been complete and utter bullshit. Right? And this is what makes BreadTube so damn dangerous. It's what makes it, all right, left theorists. This is what makes BreadTube so dangerous, right? Is that they're training people how to think. The algorithms are set up to reward it. And it's like you start to think this way. Right? Now, I criticize reactionary movies all the time, right? And there are movies that come out that I believe are legitimately problematic, to say the least. A few years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago, my wife and I went and saw an Adam Sandler movie. And it was about a family that go on vacation to Africa. And that movie, honestly, I'm surprised it got through because it was racist as hell. They never said what country in Africa they went to. Africa is not a country, it is a continent. But they go on vacation to Africa, just kind of like we go on vacation to North America all the time. I mean, it was like, so they never say what country they're in. All the African characters don't have names and act kind of stupid. And I forget the name of this movie with Adam Sandler. But I saw it, and it was like in the final year that Obama was president. And my wife and I were sitting there, and we're like, this is really racist. I mean, this stuff is really, really racist. Blended is the name of the movie. Yeah, and I sat there, and I thought, this is really racist. This is quite an offensive movie. They go on vacation to an unnamed African country. The African characters are all like stereotypes without names. Like, goodness gracious, so there's nothing wrong with calling out movies, but it's like, I'm sitting there in the movie and I'm realizing, like, wow, like, I could do the bread tube thing with just about anything, right? So that was one thing I was thinking about while I was sitting there in the movie. So I thought I would share that with you, all right? And this is what we're up against as we struggle to bring back dialectical and historical materialism and Marxism and the understanding that the proletariat, the working class, has nothing to lose but their chains and a whole wide world to win, that we struggle for the banks, factories, and industries, the major centers of economic power to be controlled by the people and not operated for the profits of a few, as we organize to try and build a society beyond capitalism, a society where the people are in control, and development and human growth is unlimited by the irrationality of greed. As we struggle to do that, we are up against a lot of ideological poison. Let's just be straight up and real about it. So we've got our work cut out for us. Now, I just wanted to reflect on that, as I reflected on going to the movies. I wanted to also mention, in passing, that, events that are happening in the Middle East right now, there's also an event that is on the horizon, which is the elections in Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran is set to have an election pretty soon. And it appears that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, very well is running. He is running. He will be a candidate in the election that's coming up. And that polls in Iran indicate that he has very strong public support. There are a number of Iranians who support Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And on top of that, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, as you will know, he went and met with Fidel Castro, spoke very highly of the Cuban Revolution. He made a point of criticizing capitalism in his speeches and emphasizing the anti-capitalist goals of the Islamic Revolution, right? They say that, not capitalism but Islam was one of the slogans that Khomeini used. Neither East nor West, war of poverty against wealth. There was a very anti-capitalist edge to the Islamic Revolution of Iran. And the events that have just taken place and continue to take place in Gaza seem to be events that would motivate people throughout the Muslim world and people in Iran to rally behind the most anti-Israel and the most hardline candidate. And if you add to the fact that President Rouhani, the current leader of Iran, took office on a platform of the Iran nuclear deal will save Iran. He said, look, I'm going to negotiate with Iran. My predecessor, Ahmadinejad, he's this crazy extremist. I'm going to negotiate with the United States. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to sign a nuclear deal. And it's going to fix our economy. Everything's going to get better. We're going to sign a nuclear deal with America, and everything's going to get better. Vote for me. And Iran did sit down and did sign that nuclear deal. And as a result, Iran's economy has not gotten better. It's gotten a lot worse. And on top of that, Iran's national hero, Qasem Soleimani, has been murdered. And on top of that, an Iranian nuclear scientist has been murdered. And it appears that, that all of the promises of the reformist movement that Rouhani comes from, the so-called moderates, all of their promises seem to have failed to deliver. So I think it's very, very possible. I mean, who knows what could happen at the end of the day, right? You know, the way the Iranian elections happen is they do have a guardian council that vets the candidates to make sure they're in line with the Islamic Revolution. There's been times where Ahmadinejad has not been allowed to run before. Like there's been times the Guardian Council has said you're not going to participate in the election. So it may be that he's not allowed to run. But if Ahmadinejad is approved by the Iranian Guardian Council, and if he ends up being in the elections, there's a good chance. Never predict the future. We have no crystal ball. There's a very good chance that Ahmadinejad may once again be the president of the Islamic Revolution, the Islamic Republic of Iran, right? The leader of the revolution, Supreme Leader Khamenei, will continue to be the spokesperson and absolute ideological and religious leader of the Islamic Revolution. But Ahmadinejad may be the head of state, may be the elected president. That's big. That is very, very big, and that could be the result of Israel's recent escalation of events. Some people speculate that Netanyahu did this because of his own political troubles, because he's seen as he's facing all kinds of corruption scandals, and that his leadership is being questioned among Israelis. Some people look at this and they say this is about Trump, and that Trump was very, very pro-Israel and had, enabled Israel to get recognition from Bahrain and from the United Arab Emirates, and, Trump had moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and that, Trump was seen as pro-Israeli, and Biden is not as pro-Israel, so they want to embarrass Biden and make it look like Biden doesn't have a right response to it, and that this is why, we know why it happened, right? This was the fact that Israel made a decision to target the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the last Friday of the month of Ramadan, and to basically provoke a situation where there were going to be clashes between Israeli, military and security forces and the, those attending prayer at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That was, and they provoked this situation on purpose. The question is why, right? Why did Netanyahu choose to push this button right now? Why did he choose to push this button right now? Do the Iranian elections? Is he trying to get Ahmadinejad back in there so he can get the world to see how dangerous Iran is and make sure the Iran nuclear deal never goes back in? Is he trying to? And thank you, Tanai. Is he trying to embarrass Biden? Is he trying to just deflect from his own scandal? Is it all of the above? What's going on here? What's going on here? We really don't know what the motivation is, but we do know that the response to Israel's actions is much bigger than it has been in the past. The outrage is massive. There is just massive condemnation of Israel for what Israel's doing. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia seems to be getting friendlier to Iran all of a sudden. They've suddenly taken a complete U-turn, and instead of trying to polarize the region against Iran, they're talking to Iran. We have the forces in Yemen even offering a united front with Saudi Arabia if they could defeat Israel. So things are suddenly taking a different turn in the Middle East. We have Donald Trump on Twitter gleefully celebrating, and saying, "Oh, this shows that I was making peace in the Middle East and Biden ruined it all." And this is interesting. We don't know how all these events will develop. We don't know ultimately what will occur. But we know that things are moving in a rapidly different direction. And one aspect of the times we live in is how rapidly events can change, right? That it used to be that it took a long time for things to change. But what we've learned about world events in recent years is that they can rapidly go in a different direction. No, Trump is not back on Twitter. Trump is still banned from Twitter. They will determine in August whether or not that ban is permanent. But Trump has got his own website where he's basically tweeting. It's not officially on Twitter. So there you go. these are strange events. The world seems to be on the side of the Palestinians overwhelmingly, and we shall see how things develop. So that's really what I wanted to say for my opening remarks tonight. Not the longest opening remarks I've ever given, but that's okay because it's late, because it's summertime and all of that. So I'm going to take another sip of my unnamed orange beverage. And on that note, Names and locations. Folks, names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Who is with us? Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? San Jose. Ryan in Oakland. Chaya in Montreal. Alan in Chicago. Anthony, much appreciated. Caleb says Kinky. Well, thank you, Kinky. I appreciate the super chat. Montreal. Jared from Virginia. Took a bus to Los Angeles to attend the March for Palestine. Kendall in San Diego. Joey from Belize. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio. JT24 in Mississippi. Danny from Eureka, Illinois. Chicago. Elias Wall, Wisconsin. Jason Lee, Hong Kong. Pasadena, California. St. Louis. William Kane, Southwest Michigan. Nikki from San Diego. Newark, New Jersey. Back in Vegas now, Arctic Angel in Norway, West Palm Beach, Denver, Colorado, Keaton Mansfield in Illinois Heartland. You are now a mod, Keaton. Shout out to you. All right, St. David's, Bermuda, Poland, Clydebank, Los Angeles, Balthazar in Oakland, Bermuda. Dust James is out in Lee County, North Carolina. Mo in Toronto, California. Kieran from San Diego. Joey from McKees Rocks. Shout out to Joey and Greg from McKees Rocks. Arabia. Branson, Missouri. Sergey from Novorossiya. Little Falls, New Jersey. West Palm Beach. Coolsville, California. New Jersey. Los Angeles, Australia. Ben in Colorado. West Palm Beach. Adelaide, Australia. Auckland, New Zealand. Allende, Mexico. Oh boy. Bermuda and Comrade, West Palm Beach, Atlanta, Georgia, Felix Lopez, very good. Beijing, welcome from Beijing. New Jersey, John in Houston, West Palm Beach, Redneck Red in West Virginia, Detroit, FTW all the way, Denver, Colorado. Wow, Northern Michigan, 259 live views. We are growing, says Dust James. We are, yes. I remember, folks remember when we had 30 people watching this. This channel has expanded a lot. Joey, Philly, Pomona, California, welcome to the Wrench Gang, Texas. Madonna from Iran, congratulations to you and your wife. Thank you, Madonna, good friend of the program. Miami, Florida, Wrench Gang. William Z. Foster from Paradise. Northern California, I bet Haas is watching. Tucker Marks in Missouri. NATO, Pano, Sydney, Australia. Caleb skipped me. It's cool. I didn't skip you, Zachariah. You're right there. Martin in Ireland. Victor, California. Wisconsin. Tamaro and Dario from Brooklyn. Welcome. Richie from Staten Island. Norway. Mohsin from Iran. Longmorn in Dallas, Texas. Sao Paulo, Brazil. Thailand. Nashville. Wow. Henderson, Nevada. One more time, Wrench in the chat. Billings, Montana. Mikey, welcome, Mikey. Brazil, everybody gets a new yeah, I wish I could afford that. Dunkachino from Santa Barbara. Daniel in Seattle. Tokyo, hello. Cleveland, Pirate Alex. There you go. Ugly Town, USA. Where is Ugly Town? I've never been to Ugly Town, right? Never been there. I would recommend, if the town is interested in getting, tourists or investment, it should rename its name. So there you go. Missouri, Mexico. Very, very good, folks. Very, very good. Now, I live in Brooklyn. I don't live in Ugly Town. But there you go. We need critical thinking. I'm not skipping you. I see folks and then I call them out. And some people I see and I don't read because they're things I don't want to read, but that's okay. That's how these things work. So we've got a number of super chats to get through here, but keep them rolling in because some of these I honestly don't know very much about. There are people asking me about movies that I have not seen. Some of this I can answer, some of this I cannot. So I will start answering these super chats, but keep the super chats rolling in because, the more the merrier. All right. The first question we got is about, can you describe the anti-rootless cosmopolitan campaign in the Soviet Union? There was no anti-rootless cosmopolitan campaign. There was an incident called the Doctor's Plot. Okay, someone's saying to check out Saeed Mohammed in Iran. All right, I don't know much about him, but you'll have to check him out. But the Doctor's Plot. There was a group of doctors who were accused of trying to assassinate Stalin. and they were arrested. And in a lot of Soviet media, they referred to these doctors who were accused of trying to assassinate Stalin as rootless cosmopolitans. And the way that that is commonly taught in American schools and in American media is that rootless cosmopolitan was code for Jew, that it was an anti-Semitic campaign. However, a number of the doctors who were arrested and executed as part of the doctors' plot were not Jewish. Now, there was a percentage of them who were, but many of them were not. So I question whether or not the doctors' plot, was really coded anti-Semitism because I mean, if rootless cosmopolitan is code for Jew, then why are a number of the doctors involved in the doctor's plot to kill Stalin not Jewish? But at the end of the day, I wasn't there. I know that there is a long history of anti-Semitism in Russia, going back thousands of years. So is it possible? Is it possible that such things would exist? Sure, right? Liberals more evasive to open discussions. All right, yeah. Liberals more evasive to open discussion. All right. So is it possible? Sure, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's not because I wasn't there and I don't know it. And I do know that for thousands of years, where was this super chat I missed about authoritarianism? Is anti-authoritarianism inherently bad? Is authoritarianism inherently bad? Authoritarianism inherently bad. Good question. Good question. Writing it down. All right. So I don't know that the doctor's plot was the doctor's plot and the rhetoric about rootless cosmopolitans was inherently anti-Semitic. It's assumed, it's repeated as fact in American media that yes, that was anti-Semitism. I don't know that that was fact. I'm not saying it wasn't because I wasn't there, and it's certainly possible. But based on my understanding of the doctor's plot, I don't see that as just proof, and that's the way it's always taught. The way Soviet history is generally taught in the United States is everything bad about the Soviet Union is treated as undisputed fact, right? It's just considered undisputed fact. Any allegation, any rumor, any speculation is, if it's bad about the Soviets, it's true. And all the good things the Soviet Union achieved they don't matter, they're trivialized. And I noticed this, it's called lying through omission. Right? The Soviet Union took a country that was impoverished and made it an industrial superpower. They wiped out illiteracy. The country had 60% illiteracy. Had six, I already addressed the question, so I'm finishing that, but I'm not going to address it again. But it had 60% illiteracy. The Soviet Union wiped out that illiteracy. It electrified the entire country, created full employment, no unemployment. It industrialized the country. It built huge power plants. People died in the fight against the Nazis. And then on top of that, they invented space travel. They invented the AK-47 rifle. They invented LED lights. The achievements of the Soviet Union are massive. Can you imagine an entire country becoming rapidly industrialized, no unemployment, planned economy. I mean, this is massive. And U.S. history books just kind of gloss over that. Yeah, there were a lot of economic achievements, and then they spend pages and pages and pages about the famine in Ukraine in 1931, pages and pages and pages about, the Moscow trials and the purges and the Great Terror. And it's called lying through emphasis, right? All the achievements of the USSR, despite being massive, are irrelevant. And all of the problems of the USSR are the focus. Meanwhile, all right, US, UK, Israel, flags, equivalent. And at the same time, all of the achievements just get a paragraph. And then on top of that, any unconfirmed speculation is repeated as truth. Marxism, still popular in Russia, is repeated as truth. And that's what you do. Look, there's a great not a great book, an awful book, but a book that's a great example of this. And it's called Mao: The Unknown Story, by John Holliday, and I'm going to mispronounce the name of the other author, so I don't want to say her name. But, it's this book that was published. It was endorsed by George W. Bush, President of the United States, and it purports to be a biography of Mao Zedong. And it makes all kinds of ridiculous claims. It claims that some of the most famous battles in the history of the Chinese Revolution never happened. It claims that it portrays Mao as this satanic psychopath, basically, this murderous psychopath. It takes Mao's, quotations from Mao out of context to make Mao look more evil. At one point it says that Mao said that half of China would have to die. He didn't care. He was going to continue his policies, even if half of China had to die. And then if you look at the actual quote, he's saying the opposite. He's saying they need to change their policies, because if they don't change them, half the country might die. It's like they have Mao saying the opposite of what he said just in order to demonize him. All kinds of personal accounts of people are repeated as fact, and they are personal accounts of people that cannot be verified. Right? It's just, well, somebody here said something, and so it's repeated as fact. All the claims from this doctor who is Mao's personal physician, who wrote this book, The Private Life of Chairman Mao, that says all kinds of nasty things about Mao. He's the only source for that. And hundreds of people who worked with Mao personally have said that it was not true, but it doesn't matter. This one guy who defected to the United States and wrote this hit piece about Mao, claiming to have been Mao's personal physician, is repeated as if it's absolutely true. This guy said it, even though hundreds of people who worked with Mao have said that it's not in any way accurate or representative of Mao, have said the guy who wrote it was Mao's doctor one time, and that the book is a fraud, but it doesn't matter. It's repeated as absolute fact. And this is they have this narrative where Mao is just pure evil. And again, this is how you do it, lying through emphasis. She doesn't talk about all the people Mao raised out of poverty. She doesn't talk about all of the wild popularity that Mao had, not just in China, but all over the world. And she repeats every negative assertion about Mao as if it's undisputed fact. She claims that very, very important historical events didn't happen, like, certain battles in the Chinese Revolution didn't happen. And, and then she emphasizes everything that went bad. And it's this is how most history, if you go to a bookstore in the United States and you find a book on the history of the Soviet Union or the history of China or the history of Cuba, this is the kind of scholarship that you're going to see. And it's scholarship that says that the huge, tremendous improvement for the lives of millions of people doesn't matter. It's scholarship that repeats every allegation that's negative with no criticism whatsoever. It's scholarship that downplays achievements, and it's scholarship that repeats rumors as fact and makes very bold assertions about the history of the Soviet Union or China, and assumes that, that because it feeds their narrative, it's true, right? And this is, some people have stood up to this. Dr. Grover Furr, I can't endorse everything he's ever said because, I just don't know enough about Soviet history, but at least he's stood up to this with his blood lies, right? He refuted Dr. Timothy Snyder's book, Blood Lies. And when I read Blood Lies by Grover Furr and saw the level of deception that the head of the Russian Studies Department at Yale had engaged in, Timothy Snyder, the head of the Russian Studies Department at Yale, the fact that Grover Furr, by opening the Soviet archives, could just rip this guy to shreds and show that he was just lying, that should be like an alarm bell that, that the way you get tenure and the way you become the head of the Russian Studies Department at Yale is not by engaging in honest scholarship. It's by pushing a narrative that people want to hear, an anti-Russian, anti-Soviet, anti-communist narrative. And, Grover Furr, he shows that there is a lot of dishonesty in Timothy Snyder's book. And the same, we know about Robert Conquest and his ties and such, and that there is, there is a problem with what people are presented with as the assessment of the events of the 20th century is wrong, right? And this is, I debated Destiny, right? And that was one of my best debates, is when I debated Destiny, Stephen Bonnell. And the reason it went so well is because Destiny people get high on this overconfidence, right? Destiny, I assume he studied American universities, American schools. He reads American books on Soviet history. And so he has this blown up overconfidence that there was nothing good about it. Central planning never achieved anything, ever. Everywhere communism's ever been tried, he had this overconfidence. And I just sat there and read facts off. And these were facts that were true. They were undisputedly true. And he was not prepared to deal with them because he's brainwashed. I mean, he assumed that there could not possibly be any argument in my favor. Okay. Differences between Mao, Deng, and Xi. All right. Okay. All right. But anyway, I guess that was me. That was me answering the question about cosmopolitans. Arthur Porter asked me the next super chat question, and I don't know the answer. I used to know years ago. I don't know about the Teapot Dome scandal. I'll just be honest. I know it's something involving corruption. I believe it was in the early 20th century in the United States. There was a congressman that were taking bribes or something, but I honestly can't explain. I can't get on here and explain the details of the Teapot Dome scandal because I just don't remember it. I just don't remember it. So I apologize. All right. Next question. Libya terrorists and Azov battalion. Well, do you remember the Manchester bombing? Thanks, Caleb. Okay. You're welcome. Do you remember the Manchester bombing? When this concert in Manchester, Britain, Manchester, England was bombed, and it was horrendous. It was a horrendous bombing, this terrorist bombing that happened in Manchester. And I got filled with rage when I watched the coverage because we now know it was not a secret. It was like well known. It was not a secret to anybody. It came out very quickly that the bomber, the person who bombed the concert, Salman Abedi, was somebody the US and UK governments had sent to Libya to fight Gaddafi. He was a Wahhabi terrorist. He was a Libyan, and he and his daddy went to Libya with American guns and British guns to overthrow the socialist government of Gaddafi. That should have been front page news, that the US government, in order to overthrow a socialist government that was an ally in the war on terror, armed a crazy terrorist extremist and his father, sent them to Libya to do horrendous things. And then they came back from Libya and bombed a concert. And it's unbelievable. If you looked at the media coverage at the time, some of the reports made it sound like he supported Gaddafi. I kid you not, it would be worded very carefully, like somebody who fought at the time Gaddafi was in power. Yeah, fought against Gaddafi with the support of the United States and the United Kingdom. And it's like, that should have been front page news, that the guy who committed that horrendous bombing in Manchester was somebody that the United States government had armed to overthrow a socialist government. Right? That should have been front page news, right? But it wasn't, because it doesn't fit the narrative that all those people in Manchester were killed by the kind of people that America gives guns to fight against socialism. I mean, that should be front page news, but, it doesn't fit the narrative, so it was conveniently left out. And it was infuriating. It was infuriating because Americans were rightly worried about, and horrified by this horrendous bombing, and they were just horrified by this horrendous bombing. And instead of seeing that, oh, maybe we shouldn't be arming crazy extremists to overthrow governments around the world, Americans, basically got told, see, this is how crazy Muslims are. Muslims are all terrorists. Yeah, Muslims are terrorists. Be afraid of Muslims. That was what we got out of it. We got Islamophobia. That's what we got out of it. That's it. We got, Muslims are all a bunch of terrorists. It's like, no, the U.S. government arms and trains terrorists to overthrow anti-imperialist and socialist governments. And, yeah, and, that's Libya. And now, in Ukraine, there's the Azov battalion. This is a group of Nazis. Like, straight-up Nazis. Like, admirers of the pro-Nazi militias that fought against the Soviet Union during World War II. They're being backed by the United States and Ukraine. And, we're constantly being told that anyone who supports Russia, anybody who supports China is a Nazi, whereas the US government is backing actual ultra-nationalist Nazi sympathizers in Ukraine, people who actually admire people who fought for Hitler, people who tear down and destroy World War II memorials, are being backed by the US government. And again, it's being conveniently kept out. I mean, we're having this whole thing in the United States, the whole bread tube thing where everybody's a Nazi. But actual literal Nazis are being backed by the American government in Ukraine, being provided with arms and lethal weapons. And that's just conveniently left out. Very frustrating. Very frustrating, isn't it? Alrighty. Now here's a question. How would Lenin organize in 2021? How would Lenin organize in 2021? Again, these are one of these hypotheticals that you do where it's like Lenin, I mean, how different would Lenin be if he grew up in a society where there was TV and not, and how different would Lenin be if he grew up in the United States and not Russia I mean, it's like there's many, okay, CPI update. There's many ways of looking at this. I think, though, if you really want to get into it, if you want to play this game, the important thing is to understand Lenin's method of organizing. Okay, so Lenin was a member of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. All right, let's just back up, right? I mean, I hate to do this, but with history, you got to start at something of a beginning. You can't just start in the middle. So in Russia is run by the Tsar. It's got capitalism in the urban areas, but it's largely a feudal country. They've got, a medieval czarist autocracy, like a king. There's a whole milieu of students, largely wealthy students, who want to overthrow the Tsar. And the people who want to overthrow the Tsar divide into different groups. The most mainstream group is called the cadets, or the constitutional Democrats. And they just want to overthrow the Tsar and have a constitutional democracy. Then there is a group that they call the Narudniks. And the Narudniks are peasant anarchists. They want to go organize the peasants to, share all the land. They're called the Narudniks. And they believe it'll be the peasantry that'll make the revolution. And then there's a group called the terrorists. And they believe that the way to overthrow the Tsar is to engage in violent assassinations and bombings. And then there is finally, comes to Russia, a guy named Yuri Plekhanov. And Yuri Plekhanov is a Russian who has studied the works of Karl Marx. And he establishes the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. And they are Marxists. And what makes the Marxists of Russia different than the terrorists and the constitutional Democrats and the Narudniks is that the Marxists believe that it'll be factory workers. It'll be the workers in factories that will make the revolution. All right, introduce others to Marxist ideas in USA. All right, and that's what makes the Marxists different. Yuri Plekhanov is the father of Russian Marxism, right? And he translates Marx's works into Russian. He forms the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. And Lenin is a follower of Yuri Plekhanov, joins the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, does revolutionary activism. And the main thing that they do is there are labor unions that are formed in factories. Those labor unions go on strike. And they have a pretty decent-sized organization. It's largely children of the wealthier classes in Russia, nobles and capitalists, their kids go to the university and get interested in ideas. And based on that, they join the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, and then they try to go out and organize labor unions among the workers. And there is a labor movement in Russia. Workers are going on strike, demanding higher pay. A lot of peasants are moving to the cities. And so you have the beginning of a Russian Marxist movement. And Lenin, he's caught and ends up fleeing the country in exile, and he's trying to direct the Russian Marxist movement. And he determines that this way of organizing that the Bolsheviks have isn't going to work, right? That the way the Bolsheviks tend to organize is when the workers are out on strike or on strike, the Bolsheviks, or not, I'm sorry, not Bolsheviks, right? The way the Marxists in Russia organize is that when there's a strike, they tend to tail after it, right? When the workers are in motion, when there's kind of a rebellion or an uprising, they run behind it and they announce that they support it. And that's what they do. And they call it giving the economic struggle a political character. Because workers are engaged in economic struggles, they demand higher pay, they go on strike for higher pay, etc. They're demanding that higher pay. Well, the Bolsheviks show up, and or not the Bolsheviks, the Marxists of Russia show up, and they say, we are a political party. So they argue, oh, well, by being a political party that supports the strikes, the economic protests of the workers, they are giving them a political character. And that's generally what they do. In Exile, Lenin says this isn't going to work. If we're actually going to overthrow the Tsarist autocracy, if we're actually going to establish, socialism, and we need a new method. We need to develop a party of new type. A party of new type. And this party of new type will be an organization that isn't just a loose association of people who believe in Marxism, but it'll be a group of people who give the whole of their lives to the revolutionary movement. It'll be a group of professional revolutionaries who give the whole of their lives to the revolutionary movement. And on top of that, they will engage in agitation and propaganda. And Lenin distinguishes between the two. He makes clear that there is a big difference between agitation and propaganda. Agitation is simply trying to create a bigger confrontation. When workers are mad about wages, they show up and they try to create a bigger confrontation. He says it's like a bellows, right? It's this big thing that, when there was a fire, you could take this thing and blow air on the fire and it would make the fire bigger. And that the agitation is like a bellows, right? You've got your, the spark, the workers are out on strike or something. And Lenin, the Bolsheviks, they go there and they agitate. They make it bigger, right? The workers are angry. Okay, I hear you, Jared. Workers are angry, and so stir it up, right? Bigger confrontation, agitation. Part of agitation is the Bolsheviks have to find the agitators who already exist. He argues that in every factory, in every workplace, there's a natural agitator. There's somebody who is kind of a leader that emerges among the working class, right? This still to this day, it exists. There's people that are just among the people. You have, somebody in a workplace who says, hey, the boss isn't treating us right. We ought to do something about it. Or, and in every neighborhood, in every factory, you have an agitator. And Lenin says the job of the Bolsheviks is they got to go find these agitators and support them and make their messages bigger, right? And amplify them. Help them, give them resources, let them, and this is agitation, right? The second task is propaganda. Propaganda is different than agitation, Lenin argues. That agitation is simply creating a bigger confrontation, but propaganda is teaching Marxism. And that the Bolshevik Party should agitate to the broad masses of people, say, why don't you have better wages? What's this war about? Why should we go and fight and die for the capitalists? What is all of this about on the one hand? And then propagate to the advanced. When you find somebody who's very skilled and is an effective organizer, you win them to Marxism. Right? You teach them Marxism. You teach them the theory of Marxism. Right? Marxism is very complicated. Agitation is very simple. Propaganda is very complex. Agitation is for the broad masses. Propaganda is only for the advanced. That's the Bolshevik method. And eventually they developed two newspapers. The propaganda newspaper is called Iskra, which means spark. And and the agitation newspaper is called Pravda, which means truth. And Pravda is distributed widely, and it's generally letters, workers' correspondence, working people talking about the conditions in their factories and why they're bad. And Iskra is long theoretical, ideological articles about imperialism and capitalism and economics, etc. Yoga, religious opiate. And that was the Bolshevik method of organizing. with a highly disciplined organization of people who gave the whole of their lives engaging in democratic centralism, right? Meaning that their actions were coordinated. They would decide as a group what to do, but then every member was obligated to carry it out, whether they agreed with the decision or not. And if you didn't follow the decision, once the democratic process had been carried out, the group made a decision. If you didn't follow it, you were expelled from the group, right? That only those who were committed to carrying out the party line could be in the party. And they would carry out the party line, and then, what they would do is the party line would be presented to the broad masses in the form of agitation, in the form of the Pravda newspaper, that was an agitational newspaper, and it would be presented to the advanced in propaganda, which was the teaching of ideological Marxism, and that was in Iskra, which was the ideological journal. And that was the Leninist method of organizing. Party of new type, vanguard party, disciplined organization, agitation, propaganda. That's the method. That's the method. That's what it's called. That is the Bolshevik style of organizing. And there's a lot to be learned from it. What is to be done is the book that Lenin wrote in order to explain his theory of how to build a party of new type. And it's a good book, and I recommend that people read What is to be done. It's difficult to read. It is very difficult to read because it is full of obscure references and quotations to people who were around hundreds of years ago that you've never heard of. Someone actually recommends that you should read What is to be done backwards, that you should read the chapters in What is to be done in backwards order, because it'll make more sense that way. The book is written, it starts out talking about a very specific debate about the concept of freedom of criticism, and then from there it argues about the terrorism question, and then from there it argues about bowing to spontaneity, and then from there he gives an entire history of the Marxist movement in Russia. Well, if you want to understand it in our time, you should start with the entire history of the Marxist movement, and then the bowing to spontaneity debate, and then the terrorism debate, and then it's much easier to understand. But that's the book that Lenin wrote about how to organize and how to make a revolution. It's called What is to be Done. And what is to be done is very important. People should study it. People should have classes on it. People should learn it. But I am a critic of it. I'm a critic of it because I argue that it doesn't effectively work in our liberal society. What is to be done's methods were designed for a country that 60% of the population was illiterate. And, it was designed for the conditions of Russia fighting against the Tsarist autocracy in 1903. And we live in very, very different times. And very different. Information is widely accessible nowadays, and I would argue that in a lot of ways it needs to be updated. For example, the way the democratic centralist model of building organizations has a lot of problems. There's a million different parties in the United States, and a lot of that flows from democratic centralism. This demand that you fully agree with the political line of every group that you're a member of is not really realistic. People in our liberal society, where people have been told think for yourself from the time they're small, they're children, you cannot build a party where everyone's expected to agree on absolutely everything. And that's one of the problems that most communist groups in the United States have, is that, I was a member of a party, and I was expected not only to agree with that party about, our position on the elections or our position on, what was going on in Iran. I was expected to agree with our party on the entire history of the 20th century. What happened in Prague in 1968, I was expected to agree with them on it. Their analysis of events in Hungary in 1956, I was expected to agree with them on it. Leninist parties demand that you agree with them on everything. And in our time, in a society where people are constantly being told, think for yourself and all that, it's very difficult to get that level of discipline, right? And people don't do it. All the Leninist parties tend to be very small. If you have your own ideas, or if you disagree, you break away and you form your own group. And what democratic centralism generally means in American Marxist groups is there can only be one smart person in a group. There can only be one smart person, right? In every little communist group is the ego trip of one or two people. And if somebody else comes along and they're intelligent and they can read Marx for themselves and all that, well, you got to go start a new group. This is not an effective organizing style. There's plenty we can learn from it. But ultimately, I think that some of the what is to be done organizing methods need to be questioned in our time, because if you look at the American left, there's a million of these little vanguard parties that are trying to do it, and they're not very effective. We live in a very liberal society. Everyone's got their own Facebook. Everyone's got their own Twitter, right? To expect the level of groupthink and discipline that Lenin had, in 1903, where he got this whole group of people to agree and disagree, well, you're kicked out. To expect that from people is very difficult. I'm not saying that that's not ideal. Beep, beep, Maupin, sign 100% Caleb the Machine Gang, let's go. I don't know what that means, Adam, but I appreciate it. Maybe it would be great if you could get that level of discipline and coordination in an organization. I'm not against it by any means. I'm not saying it's not ideal to have a group of people that are that disciplined, right? But what I'm telling you is that it's just not possible, right? We have a society where people are constantly being taught to be very, very, very individualist. And people just don't join groups. That's what happens. And also on top of that, let me add that there's another side to it, which is humility on the part of the leaders, right? Part of the liberalism of the West is not only that people don't fall in and join groups, right? Don't follow the leader effectively or whatever, that the leaders of these groups develop big egos also, right? That Lenin was outvoted many times by the National Committee of the Bolsheviks. He was Lenin. But they outvoted him, right? And that the leaders also have to have humility, right? That humility is a very important thing. Learning to say, you know what, I don't agree with this. I don't like this person. I don't like this thing, but because I am committed to the goal, I am going to put up with this. That's part of being a revolutionary, right? Is saying, and you do this, look, like here I am on my wedding anniversary. You do this in a marriage, right? If every time your spouse annoyed you or pissed you off, you said, I'm leaving, you wouldn't be married, right? Part of being married is learning to say, okay, because I'm committed to this marriage, I'm going to tolerate some stuff I don't like, right? Maybe it'll get better, maybe it'll get worse, but because I'm committed, and that's, and human relationships, friendships are like that. But communism is supposed to not be about a friendship. It's not a bunch of friends getting together. It's not about being best pals. It's about being committed to the goal. And so in order to be a member of a revolutionary organization, you often will have that organization taking positions you do not agree with. You will have that organization engaging in activities that you don't enjoy doing. You will work with people in that revolutionary organization who you don't like, right? And that requires commitment, humility, saying, you know what, I don't like this, but the cause is bigger than me, and I am committed to it, and doing that. Our society doesn't train people to think that way. Our society trains people to say, you know what, if I don't get what I want, I'm leaving. That's the way our society tends to operate. And it doesn't just apply to the rank and file of leftist groups. It applies to the leaders. The leaders have to know how to put other people forward, have to know how to control their own egos and let other people speak at events, and learn to not be threatened by other people, and learn to make decisions that are better for the group, even, and we live in a society where the ego is unlimited, where people's egos are just out of control. And so people don't join revolutionary organizations and adhere to democratic centralism, number one. The leaders of organizations definitely they can't tame their egos. They started the group so they could be the leader, for goodness sakes, right? They could make themselves feel like the great leaders, and we have a mess. We have a mess. So, would it be better if we could build a Leninist-style organization? Absolutely. If we could do what the Bolsheviks did and build an organization where people were fully committed, people gave the whole of their lives, people engaged in a fully disciplined organization, that would be great. But it's not realistic. It's just not realistic. I'm sorry, but people in our society, as much as it would be great if they could organize in that fashion, I don't think it's realistic. We have to figure out a way that we can get all the young people who now believe in socialism into an organization that is committed to anti-imperialism, that is committed to getting out of the movement and getting to the masses. We have to do it. And we have to do it in a way that it'll actually get done, not in a way that it should be done, but in a way that it'll actually be done. And there's a difference between that, right? You can talk about how things should be, right? People should be more principled. People should be more disciplined. People should be less egotistical. People should be committed to the overall goals. People should have humility. People should control their egos. Agreed. But they don't. So what do? How do you build an organization of people that are committed to carrying out the revolutionary goals, that will effectively get the job done, that will actually get the job done? And this is something that you have to wrangle with, right? And I mean, what would Lenin do if he was in our time? Well, I told you what Lenin did back then, and if Lenin came to the United States in our time, he would be horrified. I think if Lenin went to a communist conference in the United States, he would not even know what they're talking about, right? Read Lenin's writings. Lenin writes whole books about physics, right? He wrote a whole book about physics. What is it? Materialism and empirical-criticism, right? And he goes to a conference where they're just, yeah, I mean, it would be something completely he would sit there and, I mean, it would be, they'd be chanting whatever the latest liberal slogan is, and he'd be like, what in the world is this? I mean, somebody would get up and try to talk about, economics, and they'd shout, class reductionist. Lenin would be a fish out of water in our time. He wouldn't have any idea what he was doing. His movement was much more literary, was much more steeped in ideology and Marxism, and it was a lot less movementarianist. We are tainted by the curse of the 1960s. Get with the movement, man. We got to be in the streets, brother. Got to struggle, right? It's about fighting the system, man. I mean, that 1960s movement culture has nothing to do with Bolshevism, has nothing to do with Leninism, nothing to do with it. Lenin had nothing to do with that. Marxism has nothing to do with the synthetic left. And Lenin would look at these people and he would say, don't do it. Now, I can't tell you what Lenin would do if he came back to life, all right? But I can tell you what Mao would probably do if he came back to life in our time. And honestly, this is not what you should do. But if Mao came back to life and was transported to the United States, and he was going to do the Maoist method of organizing in America in 2021, Mao would immediately go to the poorest part of Appalachia, or the poorest part of the rural South, and he would form some kind of George Washington Christian club. And he would start telling the people in this very, very poor area that the leaders of the country were traitors to Christianity and traitors to George Washington and everything that America stands for. And he would use his George Washington Christian club to incite the people of the area to fight against the local landlords and capitalists. That's what Mao would do, right? That's basically what Mao did in the countryside. The patriotic image, the Chinese, we are China, we're going to fight for a new China, the ideals of the society, going to the poorest people in that society with the message that he will fulfill the ideals they already believe in, the Chinese nation, the Chinese tradition. That's what Mao would do, right? And I honestly don't think that's the right thing to do at this time. I don't think that one should go to the poorest neighborhoods in the rural areas of the United States and organize a, George Washington Christian Association to incite the people against the local capitalists. I don't think that's the right thing to do. We're in an imperialist country, and all of that. But that would be applying, if you were to apply the methods that Mao used in China in the United States at this time, that's what you would do. I don't think that's necessarily the right thing to do. There's plenty we can learn from Mao. But this notion that Mao would be in the protest cage, marching through the streets, with the PSL or something, that's ridiculous. I mean, I'm sorry, that's ridiculous. That is not mass organizing as Mao would have done it. Mao was about, he said the masses are the water, the revolutionaries are the fish. It was about getting to where the broad masses of people are, finding out what they're suffering about, finding out what they believe, and giving it back to them from the masses to the masses. Find out what the masses already believe, what they already want, and find a way that only the communists can give it to them, from the masses to the masses, leading while learning and learning while leading, finding the masses, finding out what the masses believe, and then twisting it into something that only the communists can offer, right? And developing a program through which it can be delivered. That is the Maoist method. And I mean, we are in a different time here. We have the history of the 1960s CIA fake left to deal with. We have the legacy of racism and imperialism. We are still an imperialist country, and we are in an imperialist center, even though, the standard of living is dropping. We're still in the center of imperialism. There's the national question here in the United States. So, obviously, doing what Mao did in China in the 1930s is not going to work. But but I'm telling you, what Mao did in the 1930s and what Lenin did in Russia in 1903 has absolutely nothing to do with what communist groups are doing in the United States right now. Okay? I'm just being real about that. So I mean, that's why I am trying to form the Center for Political Innovation. We need to approach average Americans out of the movement into the masses, average Americans with a program of transforming the country. And we need to get average people to understand that capitalism is the cause of their problems. We need to build organizations that are in communities. We need to break with synthetic leftism and pessimism. We need to have an optimistic message. We need to be professional revolutionaries. We need to be suit socialists. We need to look like we could actually run the damn country someday, not look like we're trying to tear it apart and make life worse for all the working people, but like we'll actually be running the country, right? We need to have a program that could actually be implemented. And we need to get to actual people who've never been to a protest before, never met a communist before, and get them to understand our message. Right? That's what needs to be done. And that's what needs to be done. Now, the way Lenin did it in Russia, totally different time, totally different circumstances. The way Mao did it in China, totally different time, totally different circumstances. We can study that, though. We should have classes on it. You could have an entire week of classes where you just read What Is to Be Done by Lenin. You read nothing but that. I put out the manual, the Center for Political Innovation manual, the CPI manual, We Are City Builders. And in that book, I quote, I don't just quote, I have entire essays by Mao about mass organizing, right? And about, and I put them there. And I have a very good presentation by Mao that he gave to a group of students, telling them to go down to the countryside and that knowledge comes from the people, etc. This is all very, very important, right? And that we have to get out of the movement, okay? Get out of the movement. Wokeism is not going to get us to socialism in any conceivable way. It's pessimistic, it's destructive, and it's divorced from the masses. We have to get to the masses. We have to be optimistic. We have to get people to understand that we're trying to save them and save the country, and we're trying to make their life better. We have to make them think that we're upstanding, great people who could actually run the country. We have to have a coherent message and program. We have to have an economic agenda. There's some things that the left refuses to do because it's steeped in wokeism and steeped in the synthetic left that we have to do. No one else is going to do it, so we do it. Someone once said to me that if you are on the highway and someone else is in front of you and they're driving slowly, do you just stay behind them and honk your horn real loud and complain about it? No, you pull ahead of them. And that's what we have to do. It's the Center for Political Innovation. We've got to pull ahead, right? Yeah, we can get on here and yell about the synthetic left. I can tell you how mad I am at all the communist parties, but at the end of the day, it's not going to make a difference. We can yell and scream and curse the synthetic left, and we can get mad at all of them and how bullshitty they are. Okay, that's great. It needs to be said, and at least I'm brave enough to say it and get canceled for saying it, right? I've been canceled and canceled and canceled. I don't care. They keep coming at me and trying to cancel me, and I just don't care. But at the same time, if we don't actually go and do it, what are we accomplishing? Nothing. We're just demoralizing everyone. We need to get to the masses. The time has come to get to the masses. The time has come to get to the masses. And that's what the Center for Political Innovation is doing. That's why we have the manual. I've got a CPI update on here, so we'll talk about that. That's what we got to do, right? We got to, pull ahead and get to the masses. That's why the manual was published. Dust James has been going through the manual on his broadcasts. Great stuff. He's been discussing the manual. Every episode he does another section from the manual of this, and now David Fox is doing that as well. David Fox and Helen Woolley, they're having discussions of the manual. Out in Australia, out in Texas, there's a group of young people that have weekly classes where they read the CPI manual as they engage in community work. They're feeding people in their neighborhoods. When the power thing happened, and all across the country, CPI has a groundswell of energy. We have a very different approach, a very, very, very different approach. Some good things are in development, And, we're doing the best we can, and that's what we can do. And if you don't like what we're doing and you don't like our approach, that's fine. You don't have to. No one's making you join us. No one's making you approve of what we're doing. You don't have to, right? We are educating the masses. We are a think tank, an educational think tank, getting to the masses with a real socialist message and trying to save socialism so that socialism can save America. All right. That was a long answer. The Communist Party USA as puppets of the USSR. That's a narrative that we get from the 1930s. There's actually a lot of histories of the Communist Party. This is important. There's a lot of official histories of the Communist Party that begin in 1917 as the Russian Revolution is happening, and they go all the way up to 1928 when the Communist Party USA had its convention and William Z. Foster's faction took over. And they end there. And why do they end there? Right? They end there because, according to the standard academic history, according to the way the history of the Communist Party is taught in academia, that's when the Communist Party stopped. That's how the Communist Party, it spent a decade from 1919 up until 1928. It went from being a party of legitimate people who believed in communism to being a party of Soviet stooges and Soviet puppets. That's the standard narrative that you'll get. If you study any standard history of the Communist Party that was written by an American academic, they'll tell you, sure, there were a lot of people who believed in it, and there was John Reed, and there were all these people, but by 1928, they were just a bunch of Soviet stooges and Soviet puppets. Stalin, when Stalin came to lead the Communist International, the Trotskyites got kicked out, the Bukharinites got kicked out, and it was just, all these people that were just, worshipers of Stalin. That's not actually true. The William Z. Foster faction that I've written about and I've talked a lot about, they had their own teachings. They had come out of syndicalism. They've been the Syndicalist League of North America. And, this is a huge exaggeration. And there were factional disagreements in the Communist Party. Look, Earl Browder was the leader of the Communist Party during World War II and was eventually expelled and had his beliefs. He rejected the Popular Front theory of the Communist International. He rejected it. The Communist International was favoring a popular front, and Earl Browder rejected it and implemented a democratic front to support the Democratic Party. That's left out of a lot of the history, right? That the idea that they were Soviet puppets, they took leadership from the Soviet Union. That's a fact. They did take leadership from the Soviet Union. They looked up to the Soviet Union. But at the end of the day, they had their own views, right? And in the 1950s, there was a whole faction of the Communist Party that was publishing anti-Soviet stuff in the newspaper. The Daily Worker published stuff about Hungary that was not pro-Soviet at all. There were zigs and zags, and there were factions, and it's not so simple. It's really not so simple. You had Earl Browder, you had William Z. Foster, you had Gus Hall. You had different leaders. There were factional fights, the 1957 convention of the Communist Party, the fight over the black national question. It's not that simple, right? To say that they were Soviet puppets is a huge oversimplification. The Communist Party of the United States, while the Soviet Union existed, viewed the Soviet Union as their ally. It viewed the Soviet Union as the homeland of socialism, and they were sympathetic to the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union had fights with other socialist countries, they tended to align with the Soviet Union. You had Maoist parties that followed China. You had some breakaway parties, the Trotskyites, etc. But they tended to sympathize with the Soviet Union when it was fighting with other socialist countries. But just describe them as like they were Soviet puppets. They were just stooges. They just, the Soviets called them up on the phone and said, "Do this," and they said, "Oh yes, sir, Mr. Soviet." That didn't work that way at all. For example, the Communist Party USA was far more pro-Israel than the Soviet Union was. The Soviet Union was key in creating Israel, but by about 1948, the Soviet Union and Israel didn't like each other, right? There were a lot of arrests of Israeli spies in the Soviet Union. In Czechoslovakia, they had executions of Israeli spies. There were hangings, public hangings of Israeli spies in Czechoslovakia. And by about the 1950s, it was pretty clear the Soviet Union and Israel were at odds with each other, and Israel was accusing the Soviet Union of anti-Semitism and stuff. The Communist Party of the United States didn't denounce Israel until 1967, because, the Communist Party of the United States was very pro-Israel, And it wasn't until 1967 that there was any criticism of Israel by the Communist Party USA. That was a big difference. Communist Party USA was way more pro-Israel than the Soviet Union was. And that's a fact. There are other examples of differences that arose, right? So I just it's not that simple, right? That yes, the Communist Party took inspiration from the Soviet Union. The Communist Party had been part of the Communist International at one point, but to say they were Soviet puppets, that's just not the case. That's simply not the case. All right. All right. All right. I have not seen this movie about the Brazil guerrilla fighter Magalar. I haven't seen it. Midwestern Marx. Yeah, I've seen some of their stuff. They do good stuff, I guess. They promote Marxism, and I haven't seen a huge amount of their stuff, but I like it. So there you go. Alrighty. The Godfather 2, does it portray the Cuban Revolution right? I haven't seen The Godfather 2. I'm sorry. I wish I could answer more of these questions, but there you go. Arctic, NATO, geopolitics, and Russia. I haven't followed it, honestly. I know that there is disputes about the Arctic and the natural gas in the Arctic and who gets it, and the NATO countries say it's theirs, and Russia says it's theirs, but I don't know the latest developments in it by any means. I just don't know the latest developments. I mean, there's going to be a bunch of these here that I'm going to, I can't answer everything. I'm a smart guy. I know a lot of things, but I don't know everything. So, all right. 20% inflation. Again, I don't know. I mean, I'm not following the inflation issue right now. Okay. Non-synthetic left theorists to recommend. Why, yes, that is a question. I believe it was from Chaya that I can answer, right? Michael Parenti. I love Michael Parenti. I've learned a huge amount from Michael Parenti's work. Love Michael Parenti. Albert Szymanski. Love Albert Szymanski. Learned a huge amount from Albert Szymanski's work. I recommend it. Victor Perlow. Very good Marxist economist, writer. Anything by Victor Perlow. His books on American imperialism and economics. I recommend Victor Perlow and his writing. Who else? Who else do I recommend? There are many, many good Marxist writers that are out there that are non-synthetic left that I would strongly recommend their work. A lot of them. Victor Perlow, Albert Szymanski, Michael Parenti. Who else? I always recommend that people read The Future is Up to Us. The Future is Up to Us by Nelson Puri. I really recommend that book. Even though I don't get along with the person who wrote it, I will say I learned a lot by reading the book Low Wage Capitalism by Fred Goldstein. I would recommend that book, Low Wage Capitalism, Fred Goldstein. I would recommend that. I would recommend High Tech, Low Pay by Sam Marcy. I would recommend that. You're talking about contemporary Marxist writers, like folks that are not like the classics, but who would I recommend? I'm telling you, When China Rules the World by Martin Jakes. That's a very good book, right? The China Wave, Rise of a Civilization State, another very, very good book about China and its rise. There are many good books out there. There you go. I'm naming theorists. You want to talk about Marxist theorists who are good. There you go. Alrighty. Why are liberals more evasive to open discussion? Right? And the person used the example of like Tucker Carlson having, Max Blumenthal on and such. Well, the reason is liberals are now representing the status quo. Right? During the Bush years, it was pretty clear Bush was the status quo. Liberals were the dissidents. And at that point, liberals were more open. But now that liberals are becoming the status quo, that they're the de facto position. If you're going along with the American status quo, you are with the liberals and you're with Joe Biden and you're with the Democrats. And that the right wing are considered the insurgents. They're considered the rebels. They're considered the opposition. Because of that, the opposition is on the defensive and is going to look for any allies it can have and is going to be willing to engage in dialogue with a lot more people. Just like during the Bush years, the liberals were more open to having dialogue, right? The liberals were willing to engage with libertarians. They were willing to engage with communists and the far left. The liberals were the ones that were on the defensive. And so when you're on the defensive, you're more open to people who disagree with you but are critical of the status quo. Whereas the Republicans during the Bush years, the Republicans, they hated the libertarians, they especially hated the far left. It was the Republicans were the status quo. Now we're in this period where the Democrats represent the status quo. Because the Democrats represent the status quo, they don't want to talk to libertarians. They don't want to talk to the far left and socialists and anti-imperialists. They don't want to talk to people that are, on the outs with the system, right? This is how it works, right? If you are on the defensive and considered the force of opposition, you are going to be willing to have dialogue with different political forces. And if you are representing the status quo, you tend to not. And that's how it works in the United States. We're in a period where the liberal capitalists, the big capitalists with a more managerial outlook, they tend to have the upper hand. So there you go. All right. Is authoritarianism inherently bad? Here's the thing. Authoritarianism is rooted in economics, right? Throughout human history, we have seen that societies become more free and open based on economic development. When societies are very impoverished and struggling for daily existence, when daily existence is a struggle and they have to be highly disciplined and coordinated just to feed everybody, they're very authoritarian. But as the means of production develop, you have more freedom, right? Medieval Europe, no one was talking about free speech and freedom of assembly and all of that. And why? Because the economic basis of it had not developed, right? They were barely growing enough food for everybody to eat. They had, the life expectancy was very low. You can't have freedom of speech in a society where people are struggling for their daily existence. But the dawn of capitalism came with a higher stage of development that facilitated more freedom, right? And that freedom and authoritarianism are rooted in economic and material conditions. When a country is at war, for example, our U.S. Constitution says that all of our freedoms go away. If we are in a declared war with another country, we don't have freedom of speech, we don't have freedom of assembly. Why? Because the conditions are conditions of war, right? Whereas, so if a country is being invaded and attacked, it becomes authoritarian. Also, if a country is at a low level of economic development, it becomes authoritarianism. The road to freedom is development. The more developed and prosperous a society is, the more free it is. The more unstable, the more at war, the more under attack a society is, the more underdeveloped a society is, the lower level of economic development, the more authoritarian it is. It's not a moral question, and that's the problem. This moralism around human rights, where we expect every society in all of human history to have exactly the same level of freedom that we have right now in the United States in 2021. Is ridiculous, right? It's not materialist. That's idealism. This notion that, we have in the West, we talk about God-given rights or natural rights. Everyone has these rights. All humans throughout human history have had the exact same rights, life, liberty. That's not true. You couldn't have life, liberty, and property in medieval Europe. You couldn't have life, liberty, and property in ancient Rome. It wouldn't have worked. It was economic development and the rise of capitalism that gave the possibility, with a higher level of development, these kind of freedoms. And we want to eventually have a society where there is no government, where there's no state, where there can be so much economic development, so much prosperity, that there is no need for a state. We don't just want non-authoritarianism. We want to abolish authority. We want to abolish all hierarchy and all inequality. But all of that comes with a higher level of abundance, right? Authoritarianism, hierarchy, etc., is rooted in scarcity. Class society is rooted in scarcity. Inequality is rooted in scarcity. The road to liberation is abundance and development and technological progress. And in order to continue the march of technological progress and abundance, we have to overthrow capitalism, because capitalism is a system that creates poverty amid plenty. I talk about the coal miner's riddle. I talk about, self-driving cars, and this is the problem of capitalism. Capitalism is holding back human development and progress. So that's how I answer that question. I've answered it before. I'll answer it again. All right. Is the U.S., UK, and Israeli flag the equivalent of the Nazis? No. No, it's not. Okay? Because the flag of the Nazis is the flag of a political movement, and those are the flags of countries. Okay? Now, Israel was a political movement, Zionism, to create Israel, so it's a little bit different. It's not just the flag of a country, but it's still not the equivalent of the Nazis. The Nazi Party was a hateful party that demonized one group of people, seized control of Germany in order to, carry out its political agenda. The flag of Israel is the flag of a country. Now, the country was created by a political movement, and there was the Nakba, and it was the way Israel has been created was obviously wrong. And the same could be said for the United States. The United States was created with the theft of land of Native Americans and slavery, etc. And UK imperialism has done horrendous things. But at the end of the day, the U.S. flag, the UK flag, and the Israeli flag are flags of countries. The Nazi flag is the flag of a political party that had an ideology that promoted genocide. So there's a little bit of a difference there, right? There's a little bit of a difference there. So, yeah, and I will say, when I first started using the American flag and appealing to American patriotism, I had many people explain to me that that means I'm a Nazi. Seriously, right? I mean, all these communists have been taught the American flag is the symbol of empire and all of that. And, you're a Nazi. And it's like, are they right that the American flag is the flag of slavery? Yep. Are they right that the American flag is a flag that represents the slaughter of the indigenous people? Yep. And are they right that there's a lot of ugly things associated with that flag? Yep. Are they right that when we have socialism in the USA, we'll probably get a new flag? Yep. Don't disagree with any of that. But if you really believe that average Americans who think that that is their flag are Nazis, you have no business being a revolutionary in this country. Because, Martin Luther King Jr. waved that flag at his rallies. Bernie Sanders waved that flag at his rallies, okay? I'm sorry, but it's just like Americans see that as the flag that represents their country. So, yeah. Is Marxism still popular in Russia? Yeah, I would say substantially. Yeah, I mean, there's monuments to Karl Marx in Moscow. That are still on display. They haven't been taken down. The Communist Party is a massive party. It has something like 10 to 15% of the population loyal to it. Lenin's still in a mausoleum. In Red Square. There's whole areas where the Communist Party wins the local elections. Academia, a lot of the professors and academics in Russia are people who grew up and got their academic training in the Soviet Union. So, yeah, I would say Marxism, it's not the ruling ideology anymore, right? It's no longer, the Russian government doesn't believe in Marxism, right? And that they do have a state religion, Orthodox, they're Orthodox, and Christianity is the state religion, and there's much more of a nationalist perspective. But at the end of the day, yeah, is Marxism a big influence in Russia? And are there people in Russia who believe in Marxism? Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. The differences between Mao, Deng, and Xi. Well, here's the thing. So, Mao Zedong, led an army that eventually fought in a civil war, fought against Japan, fought in another civil war, and eventually took power. Goodness gracious, Alfred Rosenberg. God, goodness gracious. Okay, all right. That's Mao. Mao, he led a mass movement, political party that fought in a civil war, fought the Japanese invaders, fought in another civil war, and eventually took power. Mao was a charismatic leader who knew how to build a mass movement and political party, right? State, religion. Right? Now, Deng Xiaoping was a member of that political party. He was on the Long March with Mao. He was in the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. He was accused of being a capitalist roader, and he was sent to the countryside during the Cultural Revolution. Mao brought him back from the countryside, put him back in government. Mao died. Hao Guofeng took power, and then Deng Xiaoping took power and implemented the reform and opening up. Deng Xiaoping believed in communism like Mao, but he played a different role, which was reorienting China's socialist economy to operate in a way that would be bringing in foreign investment and rolling back a lot of the insane policies of the Gang of Four and arresting the Gang of Four and ending the Cultural Revolution. That was Deng Xiaoping. Xi Jinping, took power, I believe, in 2018 or 2017. Xi Jinping took power, and Xi Jinping, is presiding over a time when China is growing very rapidly, but it's facing a new level of hostility from the United States. There's a new level of capitalists. There's a lot of more capitalists and market capitalists in China, and China is, developing the Belt and Road Initiative, and Xi Jinping presides over China in a different time. So these are three leaders that are decisive in China's history. Mao Zedong is the leader of the party and the founder of the People's Republic. Deng Xiaoping is the founder of the Reform and Opening Up. Xi Jinping is the current leader presiding over the Belt and Road Initiative and the changes in Chinese society that are going on right now. I mean, I don't know what you want me to say about them. Those are three different leaders. Yes, different roles. I mean, but they're leading China in different times. So there you go. All right. Center for Political Innovation update. Well, how I meant to ask how religion was treated in the USSR. Okay. Religion treated in USSR. All right. Okay, next question. All right, CPI update. Some good things are happening, right? I don't want to say too much about them because at this point they're not public, but some good developments are happening. I don't want to get into too much detail, but there's a lot of people who are working with us. We're having a web conference coming up at the end of the month. Dan Kovalik will be speaking about cancel culture, as will Peter Coffin. There'll be some musical performers as well. It's going to be great. But there's also some meetups that are happening and such that I don't want to say too much more about. But my hope is that by the fall, with things being open, we'll be able to start having public events. Fingers crossed. Obviously, we can't do that with the pandemic as it is, but my hope is that by the fall, we'll be having public events around the country. We do have the manual that is available. The website is being updated. It's under construction. It should be up soon. We took down the old website. The new website is in the works. And yeah, there you go. All right. How do we introduce others to Marxist ideas in the USA? You have to learn to talk to people. You have to engage with people, right? You have to tell people, average people, when you're having a conversation, you have to bring in the Marxist perspective, and you have to be able to not sound like a typical woke leftist. You have to sound like a real Marxist, right? And you have to differentiate yourself. In order to get people to listen to you, you're going to have to make clear that what they think socialism is not what it is, and that socialism is about improving their lives. It's about a government of action that will fight for working families. And you need to learn to engage with people and put forward socialist solutions, put forward a program, present what a socialist government would do to improve their lives and be able to give an articulate answer to it. There you go. All righty. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. Ugh, my goodness. This world, I swear. Ugh. All righty. All righty. Wow. All right. Is yoga a religious opiate? I've never done yoga, so I can't comment on that. I know that some forms of yoga do have more religious elements. For some people, yoga is just exercise. For other people, yoga is more of a spiritual practice rooted in Hinduism. So it depends what your approach is. Depends what your approach is to yoga. Some people approach it from purely, this is exercise, this is stretching. Some people approach it as a spiritual practice. It really just depends. And for some people, I've heard people say that some of the yoga groups are actually cults, and people, end up giving all their money and stuff like that. I've heard some people say that that yoga, it's just it improves their body, and there's about 1 million different yoga studios and yoga interpretations. I'm not against yoga, and that's that. So there you go. All right. Alfred Rosenberg. Who was Alfred Rosenberg? Alfred Rosenberg was a Nazi ideologue and theoretician. He wrote a book called The Myth of the 20th Century, which was a book, basically, it was an anti-Christian book, basically arguing that the Bible was a forgery, the Bible had been distorted by Jews, and that that Jesus was actually not Jewish, and reinterpreting European history and Middle Eastern history in order to be in line with the Nazi Party ideology. It's gobbledygook, it's unreadable, but it was considered an ideological text of the Nazis. The Nazis would never officially publicly endorse it because it would alienate their Christian supporters, right? Germany was a Christian country. Half the country was Lutheran, the other half the country was Catholic. Um, and it would offend Germans because it was so anti-Christian, anti-Bible, etc. Um, and it kind of glorified paganism, and it also put forward this notion of the Nazi reinterpretation of the Christian faith being positive Christianity, and that the Nazi Party never would officially endorse that book, but it was considered to be, it was, while not officially endorsed, it was considered to be a very important text among Nazis about how they, because again, it was a big problem for the Nazis, which is that Jesus was Jewish. The Old Testament of the Bible is all about Israel and the Israelites and Judaism, etc. So how do you deal with that? Well, Alfred Rosenberg wrote this crazy book called The Myth of the 20th Century to try and explain how you could be a raving anti-Semite and also be a Christian, and he reinvented the Christian religion in order to be in line with Nazism. That's what the book is, and it's gobbledygook and it's nuts, and I mean that's all there is to it. Okay. All right. How was religion treated in the USSR? Well, it differed in different periods. There were times when religion was widely repressed. In the early years of the Russian Revolution, there were a lot of churches that were destroyed. A lot of members of the church hierarchy, patriarchs and such, were executed because they were complicit and they were accused of being complicit in the Tsar's crimes, etc. But then later, during the 1980s, Reverend Billy Graham went to the Soviet Union, and he said that there were more people attending church on Sunday morning in Moscow than there were in his home state of North Carolina. And when he said this, there was huge outcry. How dare Billy Graham say this? So Reverend Billy Graham had to come out and apologize. He had to apologize for saying that. But it was true that, especially in the 70s and 80s, there was widespread practice of Christianity in the Soviet Union. But at the time, yes, in the immediate aftermath of the Russian Revolution, in the 1930s, 1950s, I believe Stalin fully legalized the Russian Orthodox Church during World War II, right? During World War II, you had the full legalization of the church. Um, but it was a complicated relationship, right? I believe during the 1980s, there were a lot of Communist Party members who started to have a more or less Russian Orthodox worldview. What do you know about French Maoism in the 1950s and 60s? Well, I do know a thing or two about that, Chaya, and I will answer that question. First of all, what we know as Maoism didn't really come into existence until 1961. Okay, so in the 50s, it wasn't really a thing, but right. So the Soviet Union, Stalin died in 1956. I'm sorry, Stalin died. Then in 1956, Khrushchev gave his secret speech where he denounced Stalin. And at first, China embraced the secret speech, and then, it was in 1961, the Soviet Union and China had their falling out. And around the world, there were parties that were formed that broke away from the communist parties that were sympathizers with China. And they were Maoists. They were called Maoists, right? They generally referred to themselves as like the Communist Party, Marxist-Leninist, or something like that. And in France, there were a number of groups that broke from the Communist Party of France and were sympathetic to Mao. Uh, and especially in the 1968 events, May of 1968, you had a huge rebellion in France, like a national strike, a general strike, and people in the streets protesting, etc. There was a political crisis that almost brought down the government in France in 1968, and Maoists were a big part of it. There was a big Maoist current in France. There's a filmmaker called Jean-Luc Godard who was a Maoist, and he made two films about Maoism in France during the 1960s. And there was like a more independent film that came out in like 2004 called The Dreamers. Then it was about an American who goes to France and makes friends with some rich kids who become Maoists and lives with these French Maoists during the crisis of 1968. And the Maoist communist current, it was not pro-Soviet. It was seen as being more radical. The Maoists in France, they would stage long marches across Paris. That was one of the things they did, is they would march from one end of Paris to the other end. And it was after the long march that Mao had staged. They would march through the streets of Paris with bright red flags and big pictures of Mao as a long march to spread the message of communism. That was something that the French Maoists would do. The French Maoists would also disrupt events by the French Communist Party, and they would wave the little red book around and they would chant "Revisionniste, revisionniste, revisionniste," meaning revisionist, right? You were a revisionist, right? Yeah, I mean, Trotskyism and Maoism were big in France in the 1960s, right? The Trotskyites and the Maoists generally, they were, seen as more radical than the Communist Party. The Communist Party of France was huge and had millions of members. It still does, I think. And they were the main party that ran the trade unions, and they were seen as being stodgy and conservative. And so in France, you had a lot of young college students who became Maoists, right? And were waving Mao's little red book and stuff like that. They tended to sympathize with the Black Panthers. Also, the Algerian resistance. You have to remember Algeria and its struggle for independence from France was a big thing, and that there are black people who live in France, because they come from the countries that France had colonized, and they were sympathetic. And you had Frantz Fanon, who was an intellectual who had ties to the CIA and was one of these new left intellectuals, but was kind of generally embraced by the Maoist current. Jean-Paul Sartre, who was a big French intellectual existentialist, he gave lip service to Maoism. Sometimes he sounded like a Maoist. He'd been in the French Communist Party. He'd broken away over the Khrushchev revelations and the Hungarian events of 1956. But Jean-Paul Sartre, he talked like a Maoist sometimes. He would write positive things about Mao. Albert Camus, right? And a lot of the new left of France that was anti-communist, right? Postmodernist. A lot of those folks, they did give, say friendly things about the Maoists, right? A lot of the postmodern new left, the existentialists and all of those that were rising in France would give lip service to Maoism because they saw Maoism as being like more radical and more student oriented and not stodgy and dogmatic like the Communist Party. That, Maoism in France was very much tainted by the pessimism and the postmodernism of the new left. And it was a breakaway from the French Communist Party. There were many different groups and factions. But because the new left was, the CIA synthetic left, the pessimism, all of that was new, most of them got more or less swept up in all of that. So I hope that answers your question, Chaya. But if you want to see some movies, there's great movies. Go watch Jean-Luc Godard's movie La Chinoise. It means the Chinese. It's about a group of French college students who are Maoists, and they all live together. It's a great movie. And it's amusing. It's about a group of French college students who are Maoists, and they live together. And basically, their crazy ultra-left ideas destroy them. And, one guy commits suicide. Another group of them try to assassinate the Soviet ambassador and end up going to prison. And another group of them, one guy is like he's making his girlfriend go out and be a prostitute to support them so he can not have a job and be a revolutionary. And, and it just shows that, like, their crazy dogmatism kind of destroys them, and they're ultra-lefts. There's another movie, though, called Tout va bien, starring Jane Fonda, and it's a Maoist film, and it shows the French Communist Party as being sellouts. It's about a group of workers who occupy their factory, and they seize their sausage factory to demand higher wages. They seize their sausage factory, and Jane Fonda is the American reporter who's gone there to report on it, and she gets taken hostage by the workers, and it shows the factory workers as being sold out by the Communist Party, and seeing the Communist Party as not radical enough. And it's a pretty good movie. So yeah, go see La Chinoise. Go see Tout va bien. Go see The Dreamers, which is like a fictionalized account of the Maoist movement in France in the 70s. Yeah. I mean, it's Maoism was a big deal in France during the 1960s and 70s. It's not really a big deal in France now. I mean, there are a couple groups that are still around, but largely Trotskyism is very big in France. The French Communist Party is still a big deal. There's a lot of very big Trotskyist groups in France. There's a lot. There's I think Olivier Bonsenot. Is that how you say his name? He's the postal worker who's like a leader of like French Trotskyism. I bought his book on Che Guevara right after the financial crisis. Alain Badiou, you're asking about Alain Badiou, Chaya. Alain Badiou is an intellectual in France. He writes about the idea of communism. And Alain Badiou, I wouldn't call him a Maoist. He comes out of the Maoist tradition, right? He was inspired by the Chinese Revolution. And he argues that communism is, he breaks with the dialectical and historical narrative. And he argues that communism is a part of the human spirit, that communism was present in the slave revolt of Spartacus, communism is present in the teachings of Jesus, and that communism is not the extension it's not the result of history marching forward and feudalism leading to capitalism, leading to socialism, leading to communism. He argues that there is a communist utopianism that runs through all of humanity. And he argues that the Paris Commune of 1871 and the Shanghai Commune during the Cultural Revolution, the Shanghai Commune, where the January storm in 1967 during the Cultural Revolution, where the Red Guards seized Shanghai, that those two events, excuse me, that those two events are the only real events that should be celebrated by communists. That the rest of communist history, Cuba, the Soviet Union, all that should be thrown in the garbage. And Alain Badiou was a really big deal. He was getting a lot of BBC interviews. He was being promoted as the voice of communism, even though his ideas were very strange. It was kind of Maoism influenced by the New Left, rejecting materialism, all this stuff until Occupy Wall Street. And then Occupy Wall Street happened, and we never heard from him. Now, Slavoj Žižek was right after the financial crisis. All of a sudden, there was this Karl Marx, his ideas were back. And so they gave us Slavoj Žižek, and they gave us Richard Wolff, and they gave us Alain Badiou. Richard Wolff is still around. Slavoj Žižek is still around. Alain Badiou, is he still around? I haven't heard much from him. I guess he's still around. But those were kind of out of the financial crisis. Suddenly there's this new interest in communism, new interest in Marxism. And so BBC and the New York Times and mainstream American media announces that there are these three intellectuals that you should check out: Richard Wolff, Alain Badiou, and Slavoj Žižek. And I read their stuff at the time. I knew about it. And there was a woman who wrote The Communist Horizon. I can't remember her name. That was a book that was being circulated. And it was there was a feeling in the mainstream of American academia and discourse. We needed to have Marxism once again be part of the discourse. So these people kind of emerged. And some of them are still around and some of them aren't. So there you go. Remember that time when the Black Panthers and the white racists actually shut down Las Vegas together, forcing Nevada governor to give in? Well, that's, Jimmy Dore has done interviews about that. And that was about when there were cuts in government welfare and government assistance during the 1970s. There were some cuts. There was some austerity going on. So yes, very poor people that were white who were in the Ku Klux Klan and very poor people that were black that were sympathetic to the Black Panthers worked together around that issue. And Jimmy Dore has talked about that extensively. But there's more to it than that. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? The Black Panthers, they formed different organizations that were sympathetic to them among different nationalities. One of those organizations was called the Young Patriots, and they used the Confederate flag as their symbol. And they were based in Appalachia. And when I met Elaine Brown, when Elaine Brown came to Cleveland, and we had an event for Elaine Brown at Cleveland State University, she described the Young Patriots organization, this group of young white men from Appalachia who waved the Confederate flag as their symbol. She said these were Timothy McVeighs who had moved to the left because of the times. That's what she said. She said these guys were basically Timothy McVeighs who had moved to the left because of their times. Right? The Black Panthers were not into cancel culture. A question from Bing 4. Ronald Reagan's, yes, it's widely noted that at the time Ronald Reagan was alive, his name had 6 letters, 6 letters, 6 letters. I don't think that means anything. The Book of Revelations was written, thousands of years ago. I don't think that meant anything. I don't think that meant Reagan was the Antichrist. I think that's kind of, projection and kind of silly. But yes, that is true. That was widely commented at the time that Ronald Wilson Reagan, 6 letters, 6 letters, 6 letters. People said, oh my God, it's the sign of the beast. He's the Antichrist. That's true. All right, folks. Interesting questions tonight. Always happy to engage with you. Thanks for being an audience here. We're going to end it here tonight. So thank you for everything. I'm glad we could have this late night chat. This week, I'm going to be a lot more free in the evenings than I usually am, so I'm going to try to do a lot of these chats this week. So enjoy it. Bring your friends, bring your family. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Thank you, Gleb. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Have a good night.